Chapter 13. Lisa kept the gun on her person at all times, and she had moved the children out of the living room. There were too many windows, and she didn't want to give Jerry or anyone else an easy opportunity to hurt her family. Lisa also gave Nasir the spare pistol. She had been hesitant to give him the weapon since he wasn't familiar with guns. But Lisa knew that having him armed might give him an edge if something were to happen, and he caught on quickly with the proper gun safety protocols. It had been hours since the altercation with Jerry and the others, and while Lisa hadn't spotted any movement from the house across the street, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still planning something, still watching, waiting for the right time to enact their revenge.
Mom?
Casey reached the bottom of the stairs.
Can we get some water? It's really hot.
The summer temperatures were really in full swing, and everyone had a nice ring of sweat around their collars. It was only going to get worse, and Lisa wished the kids could go outside to try and catch a breeze, but it was too risky. "Of course," Lisa answered. "Take some up for the girls, too, okay?" Casey nodded and then headed into the garage where they had already packed all of the water in the back of the truck. Lisa almost walked out to the garage with him to make sure that he was safe, but she didn't want to make him more frightened than he already was. "Lisa." Nasir walked up behind her. He had been watching the back door. "Should I go back to the house, grab some additional supplies for the trip?" After Lisa had told Nasir the plan for taking the truck to Mike's sister's place in the mountains, he had been grateful, but he too was worried that he might not be accepted with the rest of the family. "I have some canned food and bottled water," Nasir said. "I'm sure it will come in handy." Lisa knew it would, but she wasn't sure what would happen to Nasir if he walked out of the house and exposed himself in the street. She had already risked so much to save him, and she didn't want to see him get hurt over a few cans of food. "I don't think it's safe," Lisa answered, "and Mike should be home soon." At least, that's what she kept telling herself, so she wouldn't go crazy. But the more time passed without seeing any sign of her husband, the harder it was to keep all of those horrible thoughts from taking control. "You're sure that this is okay?" Nasir walked forward with the timid posture of a child. It had been the 5th time he'd asked that, and Lisa was growing tired of reassuring him. "Nasir, I'm not leaving you and your daughters here," Lisa answered. "It's not safe for you, or for them. Now head back to the back door. Keep a watch on things, all right?" Nasir nodded. "Thank you, Lisa." Lisa turned back toward the window and stiffened when she saw Jerry leading a group of 5 men across the street, toward their house. Jerry was armed with a rifle, and the others carried bats and other blunt instruments. "Nasir, they're coming! Stay on the back door in case they come around," Lisa shouted, keeping her eyes locked onto the group of gunmen heading toward her. She retreated toward the stairs. "Kids, stay up there and lock the doors." Kelly appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mom, what's going on?" "Do it now, Kelly. Keep your brother and Nasir's daughters safe. Go!" Lisa waited until she heard her daughter's bedroom door shut before she returned to the living room. Without thinking of the consequences, Lisa charged toward the front door and then ripped it open, taking aim at Jerry's head. "Not another step!" Lisa used the door to help act as cover, but she was exposed enough that Jerry could take a shot if he wanted to. "Turn around and go home!" Jerry did stop, and he held up his hand, signaling for his men to follow suit. "We don't have to do this the hard way, Lisa. I know you and I know your family. All we want is the terrorist that you have hiding inside, nothing more. You let us have him and we'll leave you alone." And while Lisa wasn't going to hand anyone over, she was ashamed to admit that at least for a split second, she considered giving in to Jerry's request. After all, this wasn't her fight. Her priority was to protect her family. But deep down, she knew it wasn't right to let an innocent person be lost to the whims of prejudice. "This is your last warning to head back," Lisa said. Lisa prayed that she wouldn't have to resort to violence. She didn't want this any more than she thought that Jerry did. But she was surprised to see him raise his rifle in response and shoot her living room window. The glass shattered, and the kids screamed upstairs. Lisa fired one retaliatory shot, but she missed and then retreated back into the house, shutting and locking the door. She hurried back into the living room and then flipped over the couch to provide another barrier for protection. She peered over the top and saw two men heading around the back. "Nasir, they're coming to you!" Lisa shouted, then focused her aim on the three men that were coming up her front driveway. Lisa had always struggled to hit moving targets, and she wasn't able to line up a shot fast enough before Jerry and the rest of his goons managed to slide up against the garage door and out of her field of vision. Shit! The front door would provide a better angle on the garage door, and Lisa returned to it, keeping below the line of sight on the window. Two gunshots thundered from the rear of the house, pulling Lisa's attention toward Nasir, and she prayed that he was able to hold them off. Lisa returned her focus to the door, and then crouched low as she unlocked it. She opened it, peering through the crack, and before she could aim her pistol, Jerry was already poised to shoot. Jerry fired, missing the door and striking the side of the house. But it was enough to send Lisa back behind cover, and enough time for one of Jerry's goons to rush toward the living room window that had been shattered and jump inside. Lisa screamed when the man rolled forward, and she aimed the weapon at him and fired. The revolver bucked in her hand, and the bullet strayed left. A few seconds later, Nasir appeared from the kitchen, his gunfire forcing Jerry back. "Lisa, come on!" Nasir moved toward the stairs, and Lisa followed. Nasir was the first at the top of the stairs, and he stopped to let Lisa pass. When they were at the top, they paused, each of them on either side of the stairs behind the cover of the wall. "We can hold them here," Nasir said. "It's too narrow for more than one of them to come up." Lisa nodded. It was a good plan in theory. But what Nasir had failed to grasp was that they were now trapped upstairs. No way out, no way down, unless they wanted to jump 12 feet out a window. Below them, voices were hushed and hurried, and Lisa waited for someone to appear at the bottom of the stairs. She looked at Nasir, catching his attention, and spoke quietly. "Conserve your ammunition," Lisa said. "Only shoot at what you know you can hit." Nasir nodded, and then they waited. A few minutes passed, and just when Lisa was hoping that the group had given up and decided to go home, Jerry spoke. "Come on down, Lisa," Jerry said. "It's all over now." "We have the high ground," Lisa said. Lisa waited, hoping that her confidence would send him packing. But a few seconds later, she saw Barry poke his head around the corner. She fired quickly, missing Barry and sending him running. "That's enough, Lisa," Jerry said. "You and I both know that you can't stay up there forever." "And you and I both know that my husband will be coming back soon," Lisa said. "And he'll be returning with the force of the Charlotte PD." She added the lie in hopes the idiots would buy it, and for a moment she heard the doubt creep into Jerry's voice. "He ain't bringing the police with him," Jerry said. "Yes, he is," Lisa replied. "Now is your last chance, Jerry. Throw the rifle at the bottom of the stairs and walk away." It was quiet for a long time, and Lisa thought he might actually listen. But then Jerry peered around the corner and fired a shot up the stairs. Chapter 14. On the drive home, Mike fought the urge to ask his mother if she needed a break, remembering what she had told him about making sure that she was strong enough to survive the journey. She was right about needing to stand on her own 2 feet, and while Mike loved his mother, his main priority was his wife and children. They needed him more than his mother did. Society was crumbling all around him, and Mike prayed he never had to choose between saving his mother and saving his wife and children. He couldn't imagine being placed in such a dire situation. But he knew that they were in a world where dire was the new normal. was sad but true. He saw it everywhere on his ride back. Crime ran rampant in the streets. People looted and stole, fought and bickered, all of them propelled by the fear of the unknown and the uncertainty of tomorrow. Never before had the country experienced such catastrophic failure. All of the pressure points had been exposed. With no power, no communication, and no transportation, people were in the dark. And while it pained Mike to see so many people hurting one another instead of helping, not to mention the amount of crime, he knew that stopping would only cause more trouble for himself. Mike saw the stares of people as he passed on the motorcycle. The rumble of the bike's engine announced their arrival long before they were seen. Some of them waving their hands, running after him, wanting to know how he was able to move, thinking that because he was mobile, he knew what was happening. But despite the stares and the cries for help and the unsettling sights that Mike passed, the journey was uneventful. The motorcycle was nimble enough to handle all of the tight spots that Mike encountered. And by the time they neared the neighborhood, he managed to get the hang of it pretty well, and he had a better understanding of the appeal of riding a motorcycle. Mike turned back, unsure if his mother could hear him. "We're almost home. How are you doing?" "Fine." Martha's voice practically vanished into thin air the moment the words left her mouth. Mike nodded and offered a thumbs up, which his mother reciprocated. He knew she was tired. The road started to curve more once they reached the neighborhood. The panic and chaos of the inner city hadn't reached the suburbs yet, which boded well for their escape. For a moment, he thought things were turning around. But that ended when he veered onto his street. A crowd had gathered outside of his house. Heads turned at the sound of the motorcycle, and Mike was unsure of what happened. But when he saw Jerry step from his house with a rifle in his hand, firing a shot into the air and dispersing the crowd, Mike veered the motorcycle up the nearest driveway for cover. Adrenaline funneled through his veins, and Mike was in such a rush that he forgot that his mother was on the backside of the bike as she was knocked to the grass. He parked the bike, then helped her to her feet. "I'm fine," Martha said. Her cheeks were a bright red, and she was drenched in sweat. Few bugs clung to the skin and sweat of her neck. "What's going on at the house?" "I don't know," Mike answered, "but I need you to stay here and don't move until I come back, okay? No matter what happens, I need you to stay here." Martha nodded, then Mike crept toward the front of the house he had ducked behind. It was Carrie Mueller's house, and if they were home, they were keeping it to themselves. Mike stopped just before he reached the front of the Mueller's house and peered around the side. Jerry was still in the front yard, and he had sent 2 goons ahead to fetch Mike. It was Ken and Barry from across the street. Ken held a baseball bat, and Barry had a crowbar. It looked like Jerry was the only one with a gun. Mike emerged from the cover of the house, revolver aimed past Ken and Barry towards Jerry, who raised his rifle in retaliation. "Drop the gun, Jerry." Mike took 3 steps forward, and Ken and Barry stopped. He knew Jerry didn't hunt or visit the range often enough to be accurate from his current distance. "You first," Jerry said. "I haven't done anything to your family, Mike, and my quarrel isn't with them. I've tried to tell your wife that, but she won't listen." Mike couldn't imagine what could have happened, but whatever it was, Mike's first priority was disarming the enemy, an enemy who Mike had over for dinner more than once. "I'm not going to ask you to drop the weapon again," Mike said. Barry and Ken, both of them with deer-in-headlights expressions, turned back to Jerry, hoping that he would listen, but he didn't. Jerry squeezed the trigger, and just as Mike anticipated, he missed. Mike returned fire, and while the accuracy on his revolver wasn't as good as the rifle, he managed to get close enough to push Jerry back for cover. Barry and Ken took off running the moment bullets started flying, and Mike advanced to the next house up, darting around the back. Mike was only 2 houses away from his own, crossing through Buddy Dyer's backyard when Jerry finally reared his ugly head from around the corner of the next house. But the long barrel of the hunting rifle cost Jerry some time, as he had to swing it all the way around and plant his foot before he could take aim. And Mike disappeared to the front of the house as Jerry pulled the trigger. Mike paused at the front of the house, catching his breath, as he waited to see where Jerry would go. Between the motorcycle's engine and the sound of gunfire, Mike's ears were ringing. It made it difficult to tell if someone was sneaking up on him, so he was forced to keep his head on a swivel. After a minute of no sign of Jerry, Mike sprinted forward, moving across the front of Buddy's house and heading into his own front yard when a gunshot thundered behind him. Mike ducked. Another bullet fired, closer than the first as Mike passed through the front door and landed hard on his stomach. He glanced behind him and kicked the door shut with his foot. But when he saw the front window had been smashed, Mike got to his feet, revolver gripped tightly in both hands, and retreated to the stairs as Jerry appeared in the window. He looked up to the second floor, shouting, "Lisa!
We're up here!"
A bullet zipped past the left of Mike's head, and he leaned away as another bullet almost hit him. The relentless gunfire pushed Mike from the base of the stairs and toward the kitchen, putting a wall between him and Jerry. Jerry unleashed more gunfire, redecorating the inside of Mike's house with lead. But the display of force dispensed all of his ammunition, and when he paused to reload, Mike took his shot. He planted his feet and raised his revolver, aiming for Jerry's arm, and squeezed the trigger. The bullet connected with Jerry's left arm. Blood soaked the sleeve of his shirt, and he dropped the rifle, using his opposite hand to cover the wound, screaming. But Mike didn't break stride as he moved toward Jerry, now aiming the revolver at the man's head, kicking the rifle out of reach as Jerry fell to his knees. "Enough!" Mike said. "Lie on your stomach, now!" The color had drained from Jerry's cheeks, and despite the bullet wound, he complied, slowly lowering himself to the floor, letting go of his arm. Mike didn't have his cuffs, but he had some zip ties in the garage. He got a closer look at the wound on Jerry's arm and saw that he'd only grazed the man. It was nothing more than a flesh wound. "Lisa!" Mike yelled, his voice cracking from fatigue. "Lisa!"
"We're coming down!"
Footsteps followed, and then Lisa appeared in his peripheral, holding the spare weapon from the gun safe. When the pair finally locked eyes, Lisa sprinted to her husband, flinging her arms around his neck.
"Thank God you're all right!"
Mike kept his weapon trained on Jerry, even though the man was unarmed, wounded, and on his stomach. "Are the kids okay?" Lisa let go of Mike and nodded.
"They're upstairs. Nasir and his girls are with them, too."
Mike frowned. "Nasir?" He looked to his wife. "Why is he here?" Lisa looked down to Jerry, and suddenly it all clicked in Mike's head, without her saying another word. Mike sighed, shaking his head. "Jerry." Mike wanted to press his heel against the bullet hole in the man's arm and press down. "What were you thinking?" "He's one of them, Mike," Jerry said, his left cheek still flat on the carpet, spots of blood darkening the floor. "He's part of the attack." Mike ignored the ravings of the madman and turned to Lisa. "I have zip ties in the garage. I need you to go get them for me." Lisa hurried into the garage and returned with the requested items. With the fight run out of Jerry, Mike holstered his weapon and placed the zip ties around the man's wrists and ankles, and then told Lisa to grab a bandage to put over the wound.
"Where's your mother?"
Lisa asked. Mike suddenly realized that he had left his mother out in the sun. "She's alive, but I kept her back when I saw what was happening at the house. Is everyone ready to go?" Lisa hesitated. "What?" Mike asked. Lisa struggled to find the words and then moved herself and Mike away from Jerry. She lowered her voice. "I told Nasir that he and his girls can come with us to the cabin." "Lisa, you know that we can't." "They don't have anywhere else to go," Lisa said. "And if we leave them here, then more people are going to just come after them. Nasir is a good man. He helped me defend the house." "And you only had to defend the house because you brought him over here in the first place." Mike placed his hands on his wife's shoulders. I know that your heart is in the right place, but if we take them with us, we'll be painting a target on our backs."
"Because of where they come from?" Lisa asked, a bite in her tone.
"Yes," Mike answered. "As messed up as that is, yes, because of where they come from and who they look like."
He frowned and gestured to Jerry.
"He has known Nasir for the past 5 years, and look how quickly he turned on a neighbor. Imagine what someone would do who didn't even know them, Lisa. They can't come. It's okay."
Both Mike and Lisa turned at the sound of the voice and were surprised to find Nasir standing at the bottom of the stairs.
"I don't want to put your family in any more danger than I already have," Nasir said. "I will find a way to protect my family on my own."
He walked over and handed the pistol to Lisa.
"Thank you for what you did. You saved mine and my girls' lives."
Lisa looked down at the weapon and shook her head. "Keep it, you might need it." Nasir stared at the gun and then nodded.
"I'll grab my girls and leave you be."
He offered his hand to Mike, and the pair shook.
"Good luck to you, Mike." "You too, Nasir."
Mike let Nasir go, but just before the man turned, Mike saw the sadness in his eyes. It was the same look that Mike had seen on every person that he passed in the city. Mike watched Nasir head upstairs, and once he was gone, he caught the stare from his wife.
"Don't look at me like that. You know as well as I do that taking him would be a bad idea."
"He's a doctor," Lisa said, "and he and his girls are already packed. We have room in the truck."
"Lisa, enough."
Mike rubbed his temples, his mind aching from the stress of the day. He moved toward the front of the house.
"I'll get my mother. Bring the kids downstairs."
He stepped on the glass from his front living room window, which was nothing more than an open space now.
"I want to get out of here before things get worse."
Mike didn't holster his weapon, keeping the revolver in his hand as he eyed the rest of the neighborhood. There were no signs of Barry or Ken, and the crowd that had gathered in his yard had decided to remain hidden behind closed doors. He just hoped that everyone chose to stay there. Mike jogged back to the Dyer house, where he had left his mom, and found her sitting on the grass with her back against a wall. She was hunched forward, and Mike assumed that she was only catching her breath.
"Mom, we need to go."
It was the sight of blood on his mother's hand that caused Mike to stop. And then he noticed the dark blotch from the wound on her stomach, where the blood had soaked through the shirt. Martha slowly lifted her gaze to look Mike in the eye. Her face had gone pale and grown sweaty, and her voice was frail and quiet.
"Michael." "Mom!"
Mike rushed to his mother's side and put pressure on the wound. He was speechless, unsure of how this could have happened.
"Mom, what?"
"I followed you," Martha said, locking eyes with her son. "I heard your voice and the gunshots, and when I turned the corner—" She lowered her gaze to the wound on her stomach. A bullet to the gut was bad news, especially in their current situation. They needed to leave, but he knew they wouldn't find help on the road. Nasir. "Jerry!" A woman's voice echoed from down the street. "Jerry!" Mike reached for his mother's other hand and firmly placed both of them over the wound.
"Keep pressure on it."
He was afraid to move her.
"I'll be back."
He kissed her forehead and then hurried to the front of the house. The woman screaming was Pam, Jerry's wife, and she was holding another rifle as she approached Mike's house, flanked by 3 more men, another of whom was armed with a gun. "Jerry!" Pam screamed again.
"I'm in here,"
Jerry's muffled voice answered, and at the sound of her husband's voice, Pam and the others broke into a jog. Mike knew the moment they were inside the house, they would be overrun, and the close-quarters combat with firearms would create a bloodbath. Mike jogged across the lawns to make sure that the others were aware of his presence, but before he could make it to the next house, gunfire erupted from inside his own home. Pam and the others ducked, then scattered in different directions, but none of them turned tail to run. Instead, they broke off into 2 groups, one heading right,
the other heading left. Mike engaged the group that headed to the left. He didn't want to kill his neighbors. He didn't want to draw more blood, but if they didn't stop, then he would pull the trigger. Life wasn't without its consequences. Thankfully, all it took was one gunshot in their direction to send them away. With Pam and the other group pinned down by the garage, Mike snuck around the back and then announced himself before he entered through the back in case Lisa and Nasir were stationed nearby. "It's Mike, I'm coming in." He shouldered open the door and saw Nasir lower the weapon. "More people are out front," Nasir said. "By the garage, I know." Mike placed his hand on Nasir's shoulders. "My mother is hurt. I need your help. Get your girls and get into the truck." Nasir frowned. "What happened?" "Go, we don't have a lot of time." Mike pushed Nasir toward the stairs. "Hurry." Gunshots were exchanged from the front of the house, and Mike entered the living room to find his wife near the window, going tit for tat with Pam and the others. Jerry was still on his stomach and on the floor, blood seeping through the bandage, feeding his wife information. "Mike's in here, Pam." Jerry's face was bright red from the strained effort to try and keep his head up. "He's armed. Mike kicked Jerry across the jaw, and Jerry went silent. Mike joined his wife's side. "Go upstairs and get the kids, then head for the truck. I'll meet you out there soon." Lisa nodded, and Mike took her place, providing cover fire. Once Mike saw Lisa and Nasir bring the kids down and disappear into the garage, he caught sight of Ken trying to sneak through the back. "Nasir, run!" Nasir sprinted forward on command with just enough time to evade Ken's gunshots and Mike's retaliatory gunfire. With Ken in the rear and Pam in the front, Mike didn't have the firepower to hold off both of them on his own. He retreated from the window, making sure the shooters saw him move toward the garage, and then followed him into the house. It was pitch black inside the garage, and Mike smacked his knee on his workbench as he moved toward the front of the garage. "Lisa, start the truck." When Mike reached the garage door, he fumbled for the manual release handle and heard the truck's engine turn over, then sputter to life. The inside of the garage was flooded with sunlight, and Mike sprinted back to the truck and jumped into the driver's seat. "Everyone hang on." Mike pressed the clutch and then hit the gas, the truck lurching forward. He sped down the driveway. Mike floored the gas pedal as he veered left, heading back to pick up his mother as Pam and Ken finally entered the garage. Bullets chased them, but none of them hit their intended targets. Mike slammed on the brakes when he reached the Dyer's house and then sprinted out of the truck. He saw his mother in the same place where he'd left her, and he prayed that she was still alive. Mike scooped Martha up and into his arms, her body limp. "Drop the tailgate," Mike yelled, seeing Nasir in the back, and the man did as he was told. Mike transferred his mother into the back of the truck as smoothly and gently as he could, and then slammed it shut. He pointed to Nasir on his way back to the driver's seat. "Keep her alive." Pam and the others still hadn't given up their pursuit, Pam firing another shot from 3 houses down. This one struck the back left taillight, but Mike was back behind the wheel, and he sped away, leaving the home that he had built with his family in the rearview mirror. Chapter 15. The front of the cab was crowded. Mike and Lisa bookended their children, Casey and Kelly squished in the middle. Both of the kids had remained quiet since they left the house, and he noticed that his son was shaking. Mike's mouth was dry, his tongue sticking to the roof of his mouth. One hand on the wheel, he knocked on the window behind him and then opened the sliding panel. "How's she doing?" The wind whipped through the cab, and Mike caught Nasir's eyes in the rearview mirror. "She's still breathing, but she's lost a lot of blood," Nasir said. "We need to get her a transfusion quick, or she's not going to make it." Mike racked his brain to think of where they could go. He figured that his sister would have some medical supplies, but she was too far away to help them at the moment. And any hospital that they tried would either be overrun or abandoned.
"The clinic off Highway 21, Lisa said. "It's where we take the kids whenever they're sick and we don't want to go into the city." Mike nodded. It was close enough to arrive there in time, and Mike hoped that it was far enough away from the city to avoid the crowds and chaos. "Is Grandma gonna be okay?" Casey asked. Mike patted his son's knee.
"We're trying to make that happen, buddy."
"I can donate blood," Kelly said. "I'm O negative. That's the universal donor, so mine should work for her."
Mike smiled. "That'd be helpful, sweetheart, thank you." But despite the plan and well wishes, Mike wasn't sure if it would be enough. It would depend on how skilled Nasir was on the operating table, and if the clinic hadn't already been looted and destroyed. Mike stuck to the back roads, which gave him enough room to navigate with the truck, and it also kept them out of the watchful eye of the general public. But it did lengthen the time of their trip, costing them precious time. When the clinic came into view up ahead, Mike saw a crowd outside the building. He pulled into one of the vacant parking spots and shut off the engine, keeping the keys with him. He turned to his wife and saw that she still had the gun in her hands. He locked eyes with her. "No one gets near the truck." Lisa flexed her grip over the pistol as she nodded. Mike then turned to his son. "Help your mother and be nice to your sister." He looked to Kelly and squeezed her hand. "I'll come get you when it's time for the blood."
"Okay,"
Kelly said. Nasir had the tailgate open and was talking to his girls in their native language, and while he spoke it quietly, he caught some unwanted attention. Mike helped Nasir carry Martha from the truck and through the clinic's front door. The only light in the clinic was the sunlight through the windows. Mike was surprised to discover the inside mostly empty. A few people sat in the chairs in the waiting area, but there was no one at the nurse's desk. "The supplies must be through there," Nasir said, pointing to a closed door. Mike followed him, and when they passed through the door, he saw candles had been lit inside the rooms, most of which were open. Mike found the nearest one and brought his mother inside, laying her down on the table. Mike placed his hands over hers and the wound, and he took stock of her condition. Blood had soaked her shirt so much that he couldn't tell if she was still bleeding.
"Michael,"
Martha said, her voice nothing but a whisper within a breath.
"Thank you for coming back to me."
Mike gently squeezed his mother's hand, tears forming. "We don't leave our family behind, ever." Martha's breathing was shallow and quick. The flickering candlelight of the room made her look more skeleton than human. Nasir entered, carrying a box of supplies that he dropped on the counter next to the bed. "There's only one doctor that stayed behind. He has his hands full with another patient." He quickly rifled through the supplies and finally ended on a syringe that he used to pull some liquid from a bottle. "This will help with the pain and regulate her pulse." A few squirts erupted through the tip of the needle, and then he jammed it into Martha's arm. A few seconds later, and his mother lost consciousness. "Get your daughter," Nasir said. "We need to start pulling her blood." Mike released his mother's hand and let Nasir do his work. He stepped out of the building and saw that no one had come over to the truck. He also saw that Lisa had brought Nasir's daughters into the cab. All 5 of them crammed across the long bench seat. "Kelly, we need you," Mike said. The others made way for her, and Mike glanced around while she stepped out. The clinic was on the outskirts of an old neighborhood. It was scarcely populated, well beyond the city limits. It was mostly county and state land out here. The people who lived here kept to themselves, much like the folks that were staring at Mike and his family outside the convenience store from across the street. It was a group of men, mixed ages, but none of them averted their gaze when Mike looked at them. He was about to reach for his revolver when Kelly finally joined his side. Mike brought his daughter into the clinic, holding her hand until they reached Martha's room. Nasir had cut through the fabric of her shirt and was washing away the blood, dabbing at the fresh streams that sprouted out from the wound, which was surprisingly small considering the amount of blood that was generated. "There was no exit wound," Nasir said. When he noticed Kelly, he pointed toward the box. "Grab the tubing and needle and sterilize the crook of her elbow with some peroxide. Use a cotton swab to clean the area." Mike retrieved the necessary tools and then had Kelly sit down in a chair. She kept her eyes on her grandmother while Mike cleaned the skin where Mike thought that Nasir could draw blood. "Hey," Mike said, pulling his daughter's attention to him. "She's going to be all right." Kelly pulled her lips into her mouth, just like her mother whenever she was nervous. "Yeah." Once Mike finished cleaning the skin, he looked to Nasir. "She's ready." "Good," Nasir said. "Now, attach the tubing to the bag and set it on the ground next to the chair. Then grab one of the needles and find a vein." Mike shook his head. "I've never done this before." "I can't take my hands off your mother right now," Nasir said. "You'll have to do it." Mike took a breath and attached the tubing, and then found a needle from the box. He screwed the end into the other end of the tubing and searched for a vein that he could use. Kelly pointed to one. "That's where they drew blood last year for my physical. The nurse said it was the biggest one." "Right." Mike carefully pinched the needle between his fingers and then hovered it just above the vein that Kelly had identified. He wasn't sure how hard to push, so he gently pressed the needle into the vein. But he missed. "Sorry." Kelly looked away, biting her lower lip and shutting her eyes. "It's okay." Mike tried again, this time piercing the vein. A little bit of blood oozed from around the needle, and Mike examined the tubing to see if blood was going through. It wasn't. "Nothing's happening," Mike said. "Pump your hand into a fist, Kelly," Nasir said, still focused on Martha's wound. Kelly pumped her hand into a fist, squeezing tight, but still looking away from the needle in her arm. Mike watched the tubing, hoping to see some red blood flowing, and after a few more seconds, they were both rewarded. "It's working," Mike said, relieved. He looked up to his daughter, who slowly glanced down at her arm. "Good job, Kelly." "Mike, I need your help," Nasir said, his tone urgent. "Sanitize your hands all the way up to your elbows, and then put on a pair of gloves." Mike's knees cracked when he stood, and he sterilized himself quickly. He then donned the gloves and walked to the other side of the table. "What do I need to do?" Nasir reached over with his bloody hand, grabbed Mike's right hand and placed it over the wound. "I need you to help me control the bleeding until we can get her a transfusion. Keep a firm pressure, and do not move until I tell you, okay?" Mike nodded, and then glanced to his mother's expressionless face. He hated seeing his mother so weak. Growing up, she had always been such a strong woman. But time caught up to everyone. Mike only hoped that Nasir could buy her more time. Nasir worked deftly with the instruments, searching for the bullet. After a few minutes, his eyes lit up. "I have it." Sweat had beaded thickly on his face as he looked to Mike. "Try not to move. I don't know how good of a grip these tweezers have." Mike nodded, and without realizing, held his breath. Nasir slowly removed the instrument from the hole in his mother's stomach, and then removed the .22 caliber bullet fired from Jerry's rifle. He then set the bullet in a bowl and reached for the needle and thread. "The bullet was small, so that's good," Nasir said. "Should be minimal scarring on her lower intestines, which is where it was lodged." He threaded string through the needle. "It's not a good place to be shot, though, and because we don't have an MRI machine or X-ray." Mike frowned, waiting for Nasir to finish. "What?" "The likelihood of her surviving something like this at her age is unlikely," Nasir answered. Mike had been so worried about getting her fixed that he didn't consider what kind of recovery she might have. And for a brief moment,
He considered just letting her go. But then he remembered what his mother had told him on the motorcycle before they left the city. He couldn't keep moving forward while being afraid that his elderly mother couldn't handle what was coming down the road. It would be a difficult fight for her, but it wasn't his place to think she couldn't survive. We'll worry about what comes next when it happens. Nasir nodded and stitched Martha's wound. Once Mike was released from his duties, he walked over to Kelly and saw that the blood bag was full. He slowly and carefully removed the needle from the vein and then handed the bag of blood over to Nasir, allowing him to handle the transfusion. He then walked Kelly back outside to the truck, and then he looked across the street. He was glad to find the clustered group of men that had been staring at him gone. "How is she?" Lisa asked. Kelly hung by the door next to Mike, leaning against her father as she kept a cotton ball pressed down over the point where Mike had drawn blood. "Nasir got the bullet out and is stitching her up." He shrugged. "Only time will tell after that." Lisa nodded and then hugged Casey. Nasir's 2 daughters sat in the middle and kept their heads down. Mike reached for the closest one and gently touched her shoulder. "Your father did a very good thing," Mike said. "You should be very proud of him." The little girl nodded, but she didn't smile, and then looked back down. She was the younger of the 2, and then her older sister looked over to Mike. "Will we have to leave now?" she asked. Mike frowned. "Leave? What are you talking about?" "We heard you talking to our father about how it was bad for us to be around you," she said. "Do we have to go back to our house now?" Mike's mouth hung open, and shame flooded through him as he realized that the girls had overheard his conversation with Nasir. He looked to Lisa, who wore the same saddened expression as the girls. "No, both of you and your father are coming with us. We're friends, and friends help each other. I should have remembered that sooner." The girls brightened at the news, and while Mike knew he had made the right choice by moral standards, he wasn't sure if it was the right choice in this new world order. With the heat and stench of the clinic unbearable, Mike and everyone waited outside until Nasir walked out. Blood covered his hands and traveled up to his elbows. His shirt was stained with matching splatters of red, and his shoulders slumped. The man was exhausted. "She's stable," Nasir said. Lisa leaned forward. "Is she going to make it?" Nasir shook his head. "I don't know. It's going to take time to see how well she responds to the surgery. And I still don't know what kind of internal injuries she might have sustained from the impact of the bullet. I'll monitor her vitals closely while she recovers." Mike shook the doctor's hand, thanking him again for his help. "We couldn't have done it without you, and I'm sorry for what I said at the house. I was wrong." "I understand," Nasir said. "It was a difficult situation. You just wanted to protect your family. That's all anyone wants to do in times of crisis. But I appreciate your change of heart. Do you want to see her?" Mike nodded, then followed Nasir back into the clinic. When they reached her room and he saw Martha on the table, she was so still he thought she might be dead. But Mike relaxed when Nasir walked to the bedside and smiled. "Her pulse is still strong," Nasir said. "It's a good sign." Mike joined Nasir on the opposite side of his mother and held her hand. It was small and frail, a far cry from the strong and comforting touch that Mike remembered from his childhood. "I need to check on a few other patients to help the other doctor that stayed," Nasir said, "but I'll come back to help you move her when it's time for us to leave." Nasir headed for the door, but Mike stopped him before he left. "How well stocked is this place with their medical supplies?" Mike asked. Nasir frowned. "I'm not sure." "Find out," Mike said, discreetly. Mike wasn't sure how Nasir would feel about it, but the man nodded and he left.
Mike didn't like the idea of having to steal equipment from the medical facility, but he knew how important certain medications would be moving forward. It wouldn't take much for something as simple as the flu to kill someone, and Mike didn't want that to happen to anyone in his family. Plus, he thought that showing up with some medicine would help smooth things over with Katie, over the fact that he had the beginnings of a caravan heading her way. Plus, if Mike was going to make the commitment to take care of people, then he needed to make sure that he had the resources to do so. And in a world where the law had crumbled, Mike knew that he would be forced to break it. He just hoped that he would be able to make those hard choices when it was time. Chapter 16. It was a long walk from the city to the suburbs, but after being locked up in a cell for the past several months, Melvin didn't mind the stroll. He closed his eyes, basking in the sunshine. The police badge clipped to his belt was a nifty accessory in this new world. People were very trusting to authority figures in times of crisis, because deep down they hoped that they would hold all of the solutions to their problems. But that was just a lie the authorities used to manipulate the masses into remaining calm when shit hit the fan. However, Melvin was able to use it for a different manner of control. 2 more kills had been added to his count, post-prison life, and he was falling into a nice groove. It had been easy to get them to do what he wanted. All he had to do was flash the badge and lead them into a darkened alley. The blade took care of the rest. Both of them had begged for mercy, and it was the panicked cries for help that he lived for. Nothing made him feel more powerful than holding the life of someone in the palm of his hand. Of all the people that Melvin had killed, he had never had one that faced their pending doom with any dignity. All of that flew out the window the moment they were trapped and knew what Melvin planned to do to them. Despite the myth of machismo, Melvin had learned that men and women groveled in the same way. No one wanted to die. But now, Melvin needed to ascend to the next level. In a world where the average person could be so easily killed, he needed to challenge himself and find an individual who would resist the urge to beg. He believed Detective Michael Thornton was that kind of man. At least, he hoped he was. If not, then at least he got his exercise for the day. The sun was at its highest point in the sky and starting to work its way into the downward arc of sunset when Melvin reached the small suburban neighborhood the detective called home. It was a typical middle-class area, but now it looked more like a war zone. Cars were broken down in the streets. Looting had already occurred in some of the homes that he had passed, and people had the same general sense of panic as those in the city. It was only on a smaller scale. Melvin counted the house numbers on his right until he neared the detective's house, and when he finally stood before the correct house, Melvin frowned. The garage door was open. Shell casings littered the driveway. The front living room window had been shattered, exposing the center of the house to the elements, and the front door was wide open. Had someone else beat him to killing the detective already? Despite the appearance of the house, Melvin remained cautious on his approach. He entered through the garage, hoping to keep himself concealed for as long as possible. It smelled of gas and exhaust, which was surprising considering that he hadn't seen any vehicles working since he left the city. Perhaps the detective was more resourceful than Melvin previously believed. The door to enter the house through the garage was cracked open, and Melvin drew his weapon. He carefully nudged the door open with the barrel of his gun, giving him a better line of sight inside. Melvin paused there for a moment, waiting, watching, listening. But the longer he waited, the more certain he was that there was no one waiting to ambush him, and he entered. The interior of the house was in bad shape, and from the looks of things, it was quite the fight. Furniture had been toppled, windows smashed, glass covered the floor. Bullet holes had torn through the walls. Blood stained the carpet. Melvin paused in the space between the living room and the kitchen, glancing around. No one was home. If the detective and his family were still alive, then they were far away from this place. "Damn," Melvin said. But perhaps not all was lost. He might be able to determine where Michael Thornton had gone with his family. He was wearing a detective's badge after all. Melvin walked to the staircase and ascended to the second floor and found 2 bedrooms, the children's rooms. Judging from the way that both were decorated, he assumed that the boy was younger and the girl was a teenager, probably in high school. Melvin studied each room, searching for anything that might lead him to understand what happened to the family, any clues to where they had gone. But he learned nothing useful. Melvin returned downstairs and saw another door on the opposite side of the house from where he entered. He pushed the door in and smiled. This was the master bedroom. This was where the detective and his wife laid their weary heads at night to rest. Goosebumps covered Melvin's flesh as he entered the room. Inside, he felt that connection he'd been searching for, the one that made him feel like he did before he was caught. Melvin crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, imagining the detective doing the same thing when he woke up in the morning, contemplating the day. Melvin turned his head to the left and saw a dresser with a few photographs stacked on top. He stood and walked over to investigate. The pictures were of the detective's family, and Melvin saw that he had been right about the children. The wife was pretty. It was the perfect nuclear family. One of the pictures on the dresser had all 4 of them on vacation standing in front of a big geyser. All of them were pointing and smiling in awe at the rise of the hot water behind them. It was a cheesy photo, and judging by the age of the children, it was a few years old. Melvin flipped the picture over and removed it from the frame. He rarely kept any keepsakes from his victims, but this was a special occasion. Melvin was heading into a bigger world. He was hunting someone who was a hunter himself, and he knew that this was going to be a kill that he wanted to savor and remember. Melvin neatly folded the picture into quarters and then placed it in his pocket. He glanced around the room one more time and then saw the closet in the back of the bedroom where a safe had been left open. Intrigued, Melvin walked over to investigate. It was a small safe, no bigger than a few square feet. Melvin reached in and felt papers stacked inside. He removed the papers and returned to the bed. Most of them were documents, wills, important tax information. All of the papers filled with the boring legalese. Melvin had killed a lawyer once, and in that instance, he truly believed that he was doing the world a service. But hidden amongst the documents and wills, Melvin found a particular piece of paper wedged between the boring items that didn't belong. It was an envelope with a letter inside. It had already been opened, and the return address on the envelope was a P.O. box from somewhere outside of Charlotte area, but still within North Carolina. Melvin removed the paper from inside and flipped it open. It was a letter. "Mike, I know you don't want to hear this, but I can't come to Dad's funeral. I thought I might change my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I know you'll be upset, but that's just the way it is. Give the kids a hug and a kiss for me. I hope you'll forgive me one day. And if you ever want to visit, my door is always open for you. You're the only family that I have left. Love, Katie." Melvin couldn't wipe the smile from his face even if he wanted to. Nothing was more important to most people than family, and Melvin had learned something important about his newest mark. Melvin tucked the letter back into the envelope and then glanced at the P.O. box number on the front. It wouldn't give him an exact address of where Katie lived, but he knew that it could get him close enough. He tucked the envelope into his pocket and then heard the unmistakable crunch of glass coming from the living room. Melvin quickly stood up from the bed, wondering if the detective hadn't left after all, but then realized that was folly. There weren't any places for them to hide here. Melvin gripped the pistol tightly and then maneuvered toward the bedroom door and waited, listening for the intruder. Another crunch of glass gave away the intruder's position, and Melvin knew exactly how he was going to play this scenario. "Charlotte PD, freeze!" Melvin spun around from the bedroom, aiming his gun at a pair of men who were also armed in the living room. "Drop your weapons now." "Who the hell are you?" The taller of the two spoke up. His rifle pressed up against his cheek as he brought Melvin into his sights. He had a lump on the side of his head, and his clothes and hair were disheveled. "I'm Detective Harris," Melvin said, which brought both men's attention toward the badge clipped on his belt. "Where's Michael Thornton?" "He's gone." The second man was shorter and his voice less commanding. The sidekick. Melvin arched his eyebrows. "Are you going to put that down, or are we going to have a problem?" "Depends," the tall man said. "What do you want with Michael Thornton?" Melvin was able to understand the context of the question, and based off the disarray of the house and the fact that the family had packed to leave in a hurry, Melvin deduced that the Thorntons had some trouble with the neighbors. Melvin could use this to his advantage. "Michael Thornton was being investigated by Internal Affairs," Melvin said. "We think he might have something to do with everything that's happening across the country." The taller man lowered the rifle, and his eyes widened with excitement. "I fucking knew it!" He turned to his friend. "Didn't I tell you, Barry? I bet they planned it with those fucking Middle Eastern bastards. Damn traitors!" Barry lowered his weapon as well, but he didn't share the same level of enthusiasm as his fearless leader. Instead, he squinted his eyes, studying Melvin. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "We might have," Melvin answered. "I used to work pretty closely with Michael. I even visited his house a few times with my wife for dinner." Melvin was sure that Barry recognized him from the news coverage, but the authority of a badge was to never be underestimated by the common man. It acted like blinders for anyone that tried to get too close. "Yeah," Barry said, nodding along, convincing himself the lie was true. "That must be it." "I'm Jerry," the tall man said, walking across the living room and extending his hand. "I live across the street." "Good to meet you, Jerry." Melvin reciprocated the shake and then nodded to Barry. "You too, Barry." "I tried to stop Nasir, the guy Mike must have been working with, but they managed to get the jump on me," Jerry said. "I don't know where they went, but I know what they were driving." Melvin smiled, wondering how long he should let the two idiots talk before he killed them. Any information you could provide would be helpful. Chapter 17. Mike's anxiety calmed once they were on the road again, but the stress didn't completely disappear. He knew that in this new world order, that there was no place that was truly safe. Not even his sister's cabin, which was out in the middle of nowhere. The path to the cabin took Mike and his group off of the paved roads, and they traveled the hidden dirt paths that had been carved out by his sister's mountain. Once upon a time, they were logging roads, and while they hadn't been maintained, the paths were still clear enough to drive through, so long as you had four-wheel drive. Because it was so remote, people hadn't branched out this far yet to build any new towns or cities, and that was the main reason why Katie had bought a chunk of land out here in the first place. She wanted to be as far away from civilization as she possibly could. Mike had always thought she was crazy, but after surviving the initial effects of the EMP, he was glad that his sister had been so prepared. It had been over 3 years since Mike had actually seen his sister, and he was afraid that neither would recognize one another, and he hoped that his sister didn't start shooting at them the moment she saw the truck. He didn't think that would be a good start to rebuilding their relationship, but it did give him an idea. Mike eased on the brakes and stopped. Lisa looked over from the passenger seat and frowned. "What's wrong?" Lisa asked.
"We're almost there," Mike answered. "This is the only back road into her place, and no one knows about it but me."
He took a breath and then looked at his wife.
"I should make the rest of the trip on foot alone. Talk to her."
Lisa tilted her head to the side. "Do you really think it'll make a difference how she finds out? She's not going to be happy about Nasir and his daughters no matter what." Mike understood his wife's logic, but she didn't know his sister like him.
"Maybe, but there are some things that I need to speak to her about before everyone comes up. Trust me?"
Lisa reached her hand across the seat and grabbed hold of Mike's hand tightly. "Always." Mike kissed his kids and then checked on his mother, who was still asleep, but according to Nasir, her vitals were still strong. He kissed his mother's hand and then started his journey up the final leg of the hill alone. He wasn't able to calm the butterflies in his stomach, and they only grew more frantic the longer he walked. He didn't know what he would say to his sister when they saw one another. Katie had never been a forgiving person. The tension between Mike's sister and father had created a rift in their family as wide and vast as the Grand Canyon. But Mike had never learned what caused their falling out. The dirt path narrowed to a walking trail that would be too small for the vehicles to pass through. It was overgrown with brush and dirt, but well shaded by the trees overhead. After a few minutes of walking alone, he grew lost in the quiet and the calm. The mountain and the woods were a far cry from the chaos that he had seen in the city. There were no bodies in the street, no blood splashed along concrete, no roads clogged with broken vehicles, no death, only life. Mike stopped and then closed his eyes. He tilted his face toward the fading sun. It was warm. He listened to the breeze rustling leaves and branches. He heard the distinct chirp of birds and the buzz of insects. It was the sound of life, and he preferred these much more than the screams and gunfire that he had escaped from in the city. Mike opened his eyes and then restarted his journey. He walked for a while, still finding no sign of his sister's cabin, and he began to wonder if he had taken a wrong turn somewhere. 10 minutes later, Mike exhaled relief when the path opened up to a small clearing in the woods, and he saw the backside of the cabin. But the next step forward, he heard the unmistakable pump of a 12-gauge shotgun. "Don't move." Mike spread his hands out so Katie could see them. He turned slowly.
"Hey, sis," Mike said.
Katie's hair was wild and untamed, but she attempted to keep the unruly curls out of her face with a ball cap and a ponytail. She was dressed in camouflage, everything long-sleeved and tactical. She'd always been strong, but life outdoors had only sharpened her edges.
"You going to put that thing down?"
Mike asked, hoping that she couldn't sense the worry in his voice.
"Or are you going to pull the trigger before I even have a chance to explain why I'm here?"
"I know why you're here," Katie said, still not lowering the shotgun. "But you shouldn't have come."
Mike grimaced. "Katie, we're family. And will you put the gun down?"
Katie hesitated for a moment, but then finally lowered the barrel of the weapon. She kept it at the ready, though. She still didn't fully trust him. "I'm not running a shelter out here, Mike." Mike crossed the rest of the path and got a better look at his sister.
"You never called. Why?"
"I don't want to do this right now." Katie shouldered the shotgun and then walked past her brother, but Mike snatched her arm and spun her back around.
"No," Mike said.
You don't get to walk away from this, not now.
Katie reclaimed her arm, and for a moment Mike thought she was going to aim the barrel of the gun at him and blow him away. But she didn't. I get to walk away whenever I want, Mike. That's the deal that I made for myself when I decided to live out here. This is my life, my land, and you can get the hell off of it. Katie started back up the path, and for a second, Mike considered letting her go. He wasn't sure if she was worth trying to save. But then he remembered the people that were counting on him. Because while she might be able to walk away, he couldn't. Cat, Mike said. Katie stopped, but she didn't turn around. He hadn't called her Cat since she was a teenager.
I don't know what happened to you, Mike said. I know you're mad, but my family needs a place to stay that is safe, and right now your cabin fits that bill. If not for Mom or me, then for Kelly and Casey.
Mike waited, hoping that the thought of helping her niece and nephew would break through whatever hate that she felt toward the rest of them. Because deep down he knew that Katie cared about his kids. They might be the only people she cared about anymore.
Mom's hurt, Mike said, his voice catching unexpectedly. It's pretty bad.
Katie finally turned around to face him, but she didn't take a step forward.
What happened? She was shot when we were leaving the neighborhood, Mike answered. One of the people we brought with us, Nasir. He is a doctor in Pakistan. He got the bullet out, sewed her up, but he's not sure if she'll survive or not.
Katie stared at the ground for a moment, and Mike waited anxiously to discover what she was going to decide. Mike didn't have a backup plan, so all of his chips were riding on his sister's decision. How many did you bring? Katie asked, looking up from the ground. It wasn't a yes, but Mike thought it was a step in the right direction, since it wasn't a no.
8, including me.
Katie nodded, and then chewed on her lower lip. She walked back over to her brother and stared up at him with conviction. I've only got 1 extra bed, so I hope they don't mind sleeping on the floor.
Thank you, Mike said.
Katie nodded, and then took a deep breath. Did you bring supplies?
Food, water, even some medicine and medical supplies that Nasir helped pick out, Mike answered. Hopefully it'll help.
Katie snickered and shook her head. Brother, out here, hope will get you killed.